History is often said to be written by the victors. But what happens when victory seems impossible? When you're cornered, with an enemy army blocking your way forward, and an even larger one closing in from behind? This wasn't a theory or a military thought exercise. It really happened. And the man caught in the middle found a way out with a move so daring, it's still studied to this day. This is the story of Julius Caesar at the siege of Alesia. The year is 52 BC. For 6 long years, Julius Caesar had been leading his Roman legions through the lands of Gaul, what we now call France, Belgium, and Switzerland. One after another, the proud and independent Gallic tribes were defeated. Some were conquered outright, while others were forced into shaky alliances. Caesar's campaigns were steady, brutal, and relentless. Every battle added to Rome's reach. Every victory made Caesar richer and more powerful back in Rome. But the people of Gaul had had enough. They were tired of Roman soldiers taking their grain, tired of living under foreign rule, and tired of feeling like outsiders in their own homeland. Rebellion was building, and it would soon find its leader. That leader was Vercingetorix, a strong and charismatic chieftain of the Arverni tribe. He wasn't like the old tribal leaders who fought only for their own villages and families. He saw something greater. Through sharp diplomacy, persuasive leadership, and sheer determination, Vercingetorix achieved what many believed was impossible. He united the Gallic tribes under one banner. Together, they had one goal: drive Caesar and his legions out of Gaul forever. His plan was as brutal as it was effective. He knew that facing the Romans head-on in open battle would be suicide, so instead, he decided to starve them. Vercingetorix launched a scorched earth strategy. Villages, barns, and farmlands were burned to the ground. Crops and supplies that could feed the Romans were destroyed. If Caesar's men couldn't eat, they couldn't fight. For a time, the strategy worked. Caesar's forces, far from home and with supply lines stretched thin across hostile territory, began to feel the pressure. Hunger and frustration spread through the camps. And then came a blow that shook Caesar's reputation. At the town of Gergovia, the stronghold of Vercingetorix himself, Caesar suffered a rare and humiliating defeat. That defeat struck a heavy blow to Roman pride, while at the same time giving the Gallic rebellion fresh confidence and momentum. The uprising was now larger and more determined than ever. But Julius Caesar was not the kind of commander to be cornered so easily. He pulled his legions back together, around 10 in total, and made a crucial move. He brought in a contingent of elite Germanic cavalry, fighters famous for their raw aggression and unmatched skill in battle. These horsemen would give Caesar a sharp edge against the Gauls. Vercingetorix, encouraged by his victory at Gergovia, decided to gamble. He ordered his cavalry to strike directly at Caesar's marching column, but the gamble backfired. Caesar's newly hired Germanic horsemen didn't just repel the attack, they completely broke the Gallic cavalry, scattering them in defeat. Realizing the setback, Vercingetorix made a fateful decision. He gathered his entire force, about 80,000 warriors, and withdrew to the fortified stronghold of Alesia. The site was a natural fortress, sitting high on a plateau with steep sides and protected on both flanks by rivers. From this strong position, he believed he could outlast Caesar, but Vercingetorix wasn't planning to rely only on the defenses of Alesia. Before Caesar could fully encircle the stronghold, he sent out his remaining cavalry with urgent instructions: ride across Gaul, call on every allied tribe, and assemble a massive relief army to march toward Alesia. His strategy was straightforward. He would hold Caesar pinned inside the fortress while a much larger Gallic force attacked from the outside. Together, they would crush the Romans between two armies, the hammer striking against the anvil. The problem facing Caesar now was almost absurd in scale. He was deep inside hostile territory. Directly ahead of him, an army of 80,000 Gauls sat behind strong defenses he could not storm. Somewhere behind him, a gigantic relief force was forming, ready to destroy him. Retreat would mean humiliation and certain pursuit. A direct assault would be suicidal. Caesar had become the besieger who was about to be besieged. A lesser commander might have collapsed under the pressure, But Caesar wasn't a lesser commander. Where others saw a hopeless trap, he saw a chance. If Vercingetorix wanted a decisive showdown at Alesia, Caesar was ready to give it to him. But it would not be on Gallic terms. It would be on a battlefield shaped entirely by Roman engineering, where sheer numbers would count for nothing against Caesar's ingenuity. Caesar's answer to the crisis was bold, almost unbelievable. He wasn't going to build just one wall around Alesia. He would build two. He ordered his men to begin one of the most extraordinary engineering projects ever attempted in the ancient world. The first wall, called the Circumvallation, was an 11-mile ring surrounding Alesia. It locked Vercingetorix and his 80,000 warriors inside, cutting them off from any escape or supplies. On its own, this was already an immense challenge. But Caesar's true brilliance was in what came next. He knew that a massive Gallic relief army was on its way. To prepare, he ordered a second, even larger wall to be built, this one stretching 14 miles around the outside. It was called the Contravallation, and it faced outward, designed to protect his own troops from attack. What Caesar was creating was, in effect, a giant fortress shaped like a ring, with his legions positioned in the middle. They would be both besieging the enemy and defending themselves at the same time. For about a month, the Roman soldiers worked tirelessly. Legionaries were not only fighters, they were also builders, trained to construct fortifications as well as wield their swords. And these defenses were far from simple walls. According to Caesar's own accounts and confirmed by modern archaeology, the system was a layered death trap designed to slow and break any assault. In front of the main wall, the Romans dug deep trenches and diverted rivers to flood them into wide moats. Beyond that lay hidden dangers. They prepared rows of camouflaged pits known as lilia, each one fitted with a sharpened stake at the bottom, ready to impale anyone unlucky enough to fall in. Next came the kipi, logs buried upright, their tops fitted with iron hooks designed to grab at the feet and legs of charging soldiers. Scattered across the ground were countless small sharpened stakes, called stimuli, meant to trip and wound attackers, turning any charge into chaos. And if anyone managed to survive this killing field, they would still face the main fortification itself, a 12-foot-high rampart of earth and timber, topped with a sturdy wooden palisade. Along its length stood 23 towers, each armed with Roman artillery ready to rain down missiles on the enemy. The inner wall facing Alesia was nearly identical, only slightly shorter, ensuring that the Gauls trapped inside would be just as effectively contained. As the Romans pushed forward with their construction, life inside Alesia became increasingly desperate. Vercingetorix soon realized a grim reality. His food stores were running out. What little remained was only enough to keep his warriors alive. In a harsh and calculated decision, he expelled the civilians of Alesia, thousands of men, women, and children, forcing them out through the city gates. His hope may have been that Caesar would allow them to pass through the Roman lines, or at least that removing them would stretch Caesar's supplies and distract his soldiers. Above all, it freed up precious food for his army. But Caesar showed no mercy. He refused to let the civilians through. Trapped between the walls of Alesia and the Roman fortifications, they were left to starve in the open. Their cries carried, day and night, a haunting sound that weighed heavily on the Gallic warriors inside the fortress. It was psychological warfare in its most brutal form. Yet the Romans themselves were not in comfort. Their supplies were also running dangerously low, and the endless work of building and defending had left the legionaries exhausted. The pressure was mounting. With every sunrise, the Gallic relief force drew closer. The only hope was to finish the fortifications before the enemy arrived. At last the work was complete. The trap was set. Now all that remained was to wait. In late September, the waiting ended. Roman scouts spotted them first, waves of warriors cresting the distant hills. The Gallic relief army had arrived, and its size was overwhelming. Caesar later claimed they numbered around 250,000 infantry and 8,000 cavalry. Most modern historians estimate the true figure closer to 100,000. Either way, it was a colossal host. Leading them was a council of tribal chiefs, among them Vercingetorix's own cousin, Vercassivellaunus. This was the decisive moment. Caesar's 50,000 men were now trapped exactly as Vercingetorix had intended. 80,000 Gauls pressing from inside Alesia, and another 100,000 bearing down from outside. The Romans were outnumbered at least 3-1, standing as a small island in a sea of enemies. But it was an island fortified by their own hands, ringed with walls, traps, and towers. The final clash for control of Gaul began. The first great assault came from the relief army. Their cavalry thundered across the plain, slamming into the outer defenses while their infantry followed in a massive wave. Hearing the battle erupt, Vercingetorix ordered his warriors to launch an attack from inside Alesia at the same time. The Romans were under assault from both sides. The battle was fierce and unrelenting. The Romans were stretched to their limits, forced to fight on two fronts at once. Caesar himself rode along the defensive lines, his presence giving his soldiers the courage to stand their ground. The fortifications did exactly what they were meant to do. The Gallic charge broke apart in the deadly field of traps, and the disciplined Roman legions cut down their disorganized enemies with ruthless precision. The turning point of the first assault came when Caesar unleashed his Germanic cavalry. In a furious counterattack, they crashed into the Gallic horsemen and completely shattered them. With that, the first wave had been repelled. But the Gauls weren't finished. The very next night they tried again, this time using the cover of darkness. With ladders and grappling hooks they swarmed the walls. Fighting erupted all along the ramparts, chaotic, brutal, and close quarters. In some places, the attackers even broke through. But Caesar had anticipated such a move. He had kept mobile reserves ready under his most trusted lieutenants, Marcus Antonius and Gaius Trebonius. They rushed to the danger points, sealed the breaches, and drove the Gauls back into the night. Inside Alesia, Vercingetorix also launched his attack. But his warriors struggled to fill the Roman trenches and the effort slowed them down. The delay robbed them of surprise and his assault collapsed before it could achieve a breakthrough. The second attempt had failed. The Gauls now realized that direct charges against the Roman walls were costing them dearly. But their scouts had discovered a weakness. To the north, a large hill stood outside the Roman fortifications. Caesar had placed a camp there, but its defenses were not as strong as the rest of the ring. This became the chosen point for one last, all-or-nothing strike. Vercassivellaunus, a cousin of Vercingetorix and one of the most capable Gallic chiefs, was given command of 60,000 of their best warriors. He marched them overnight to position them behind the weaker Roman camp. The plan was ambitious. At midday, Vercassivellaunus would storm the northern position. The main Gallic army outside would attack the outer defenses everywhere else to keep the Romans pinned, and at the same moment Vercingetorix would lead a final desperate charge from inside Alesia. When the assault began, it almost succeeded. Vercassivellaunus's warriors surged into the northern camp, overwhelming the Roman defenders. The line began to buckle and the situation reached a critical point. This was the moment that would define Julius Caesar's legendary reputation. He remained calm. Instead of panicking, he sent reinforcements to the sections under the most pressure. But the northern camp was on the verge of collapse and Caesar knew he had to act personally. He gathered a small group of soldiers and rode directly into the chaos, his scarlet cloak making him impossible to miss. Seeing their general, at the front lines the Roman soldiers were inspired. Their morale surged and they fought back with renewed determination. Even so, the sheer numbers of the Gauls continued to press the Romans to the brink. Caesar realized that he had to take one final, decisive risk. He ordered his top cavalry commander, Titus Labienus, to take a few cohorts, leave the safety of the fortifications right around the battlefield and strike the rear of Vercassivellaunus's army. It was an extraordinarily dangerous maneuver that temporarily weakened other sections of the Roman line. As Labienus and his cavalry disappeared from sight, the fighting reached its most intense point. Gauls were swarming into the northern camp, and the Roman line seemed moments from breaking. Then the sound of Roman trumpets echoed across the battlefield. Labienus had arrived. His cavalry smashed into the rear of the Gallic force, catching them completely off guard. The effect was immediate. The Gauls, who had believed themselves to be encircling the Romans, were suddenly trapped. Panic spread through their ranks. Soldiers dropped their weapons and fled, only to be hunted down by the relentless Germanic cavalry. Seeing their relief army fall apart, the remaining Gallic forces lost heart and broke into a full retreat. The battle was over. Caesar had won. The fields around Alesia were strewn with the dead. Tens of thousands of Gallic warriors lay fallen. While the exact numbers are difficult to confirm, the massive Gallic relief army had been effectively destroyed, and the siege of Alesia ended in total Roman victory. Inside Alesia, all hope had vanished. The Gallic defenders had seen their last chance of rescue destroyed. Their food was gone, their morale shattered. The next day, Vercingetorix called his war council. He reminded his leaders that he had fought for the freedom of Gaul, not for personal glory. Now they had to accept the inevitable. He offered them a stark choice: either kill him themselves in an attempt to appease Caesar, or surrender him alive. They chose surrender. Caesar commanded the Gallic forces to lay down their weapons and ordered their leaders to come forward. Then came one of the most famous moments in Roman history. Vercingetorix, clad in his finest armor, rode out alone. Circling the seated Caesar, he dismounted and cast his weapons at the feet of his conqueror, without uttering a word. He was taken in chains and held for 6 years, destined to appear in Caesar's triumph in Rome, the ultimate symbol of Rome's conquest of Gaul. Eventually, he was quietly executed in his prison cell, a grim end for the man who had almost united Gaul and defeated Caesar. For the other captives, Caesar was unexpectedly lenient, and there was a clear reason for it. Each Roman soldier was allowed one Gallic captive as a slave, following standard practice. But the warriors from the two most powerful tribes were spared. Caesar hoped to win their loyalty and use them to establish lasting peace across Gaul. The victory at Alesia marked the end of Gallic independence. The Great Rebellion had been crushed, and after centuries of resistance, Gaul was finally under Roman control. The Gallic Wars were over. The siege of Alesia was more than just a battle. It became a study in military strategy, one that commanders have analyzed for over 2,000 years. It is widely considered Caesar's greatest military achievement. The victory was not won by outnumbering the enemy, but by outthinking them. Caesar's brilliance rested on a few key factors. First, his engineering. The two concentric walls were a stroke of genius. He turned an impossible situation into a solution, building a fortress where he controlled every element of the battlefield. The walls and traps that Caesar built completely eliminated the Gauls' main advantage, their overwhelming numbers. Next was his understanding of psychology. From the ruthless decision to leave the civilians to starve in no man's land, to his dramatic personal appearance on the front lines, Caesar knew how to crush his enemy's morale while inspiring his own soldiers to fight with determination. Finally, his tactical flexibility set him apart. Caesar never committed all his forces at once. He kept reserves under the command of trusted generals like Marcus Antonius and Titus Labienus, deploying them at just the right moment, either to reinforce struggling sections or to deliver the decisive strike, like the cavalry charge that ultimately won the battle. His ability to read a chaotic two-front war and act decisively is what separated great generals from merely competent ones. The consequences of Alesia were monumental for Gaul. It marked the end of their independent culture and the beginning of centuries under Roman rule, eventually integrating them into the Roman world. For Rome, the conquest secured the northern frontier and brought vast wealth and manpower to fuel its expansion. For Julius Caesar, Alesia was the final step in his rise to absolute power. The riches from Gaul allowed him to pay off debts, while the loyalty of his veteran legions gave him the military strength he needed to confront political rivals in the Senate. The conquest of Gaul, capped by the stunning victory at Alesia, provided Caesar the power and prestige to eventually cross the Rubicon, dismantle the Roman Republic, and lay the foundations for the Roman Empire. The siege of Alesia stands as a textbook example of tactical brilliance. Caesar faced a situation that seemed impossible and crafted a solution that was both ruthless and genius. He showed that sometimes the most formidable weapon on a battlefield is the mind of the commander. If you found this breakdown of tactical genius fascinating, please like the video and subscribe for more stories from military history. Share in the comments which legendary battle you'd like us to analyze next. And for those who want to support the channel directly, we are, as always, deeply grateful to our patrons on Patreon. Thank you for watching.